What's up, everybody? It's Marcus D'Angelo, and we are back. We are back in action with another episode of the Hawks and S. Lance, I know you've missed me, man. How you been?
I don't know if I actually missed you, but it is what it
I always put Jake in those positions. Like we'll be
is.
celebrating like our 1 year anniversary. I'll be like, Jake, what did you get for me? It's our 1 year anniversary, and and I
Does
think we
he
all
does he give you these?
And pretty much, he's like, "Yeah, I got something for you." Well, we got something really special for the listeners here tonight because I was texting you and I was like,
Uh,
"Hey, so what do we want to talk about here?"
yeah.
And you came up with a subject that has never been discussed on any podcast I've ever done. I've never heard it discussed on any other podcast. This is going to be a good one.
I'm sure it's been discussed, but not as the main topic of the podcast, depending on, their experience with them.
It's funny. I reached out to like the research guy because I'm like,
Hmm.
hey, so we're talking about Japanese sponsors
Right.
in Japan whenever the
Yep.
guys would go over.
Yep.
And he was like, how the fuck do I research that? And I'm like, I don't think you do. Like, just give me like some questions and we're gonna shoot from the hip today, baby. But man, I'm excited because this feels like semi uncharted territory. And if you're ready, brother,
Well,
we
for
can jump.
you,
Well, yeah, me and probably 90% of the listeners, I would guess. But
this is true.
yeah, dude, I can't wait, and we can get rolling. So I guess first thing is first, Lance.
What's up?
First time you get over to Japan, your first
Uh-huh.
tour over there, are you finding people right then and there, or how does this whole process work?
Well, we have to get a little bit of an explanation, and even what did you ask me and what you thought they were?
I was like, okay, sponsor. I can't remember what I said. I was like, is that just like the people whose houses you crash at whenever
Yeah,
you're
yeah, yeah.
in
I
there?
think I think that's what you said, something to that degree. And so I guess there should be some explanation before you start asking questions as to what a Japanese sponsor is, because
True.
I think Americans, if they have no experience with it, or wrestlers, if they have no experience with it and they've never been to Japan, and you say sponsor, you start thinking of somebody who's providing goods, or whether if it's TV, a sponsor is like somebody who puts their logo on your ring so it's seen by how many ever people are watching your program, or if you've got something on YouTube or whatever the case may be. A sponsor is somebody who's paying basically for a commercial. Um, and I think when you start saying sponsor, you probably make a lot of people think that. And the thing is that in Japan, when we talk about the sponsors as pro wrestlers, we're not talking about anybody that pays for our goods. And some of them have. Like, he became a good friend of mine, and I call him a sponsor because he sponsored KES back in the day. He sponsored Monster Sauce when we were over there and things like that. And he provided goods, and it was a trade in services. He provided them, we made money off them. But when I'm talking about sponsors, and anybody that's been in Japan, especially for any extended period of time, these are basically just super fans that have a lot of money for different reasons, but they have a lot of money, and they just want to hang out with you. They just want to take you out to dinner. They just want to do a lot of crazier things than just dinner. But it's usually just a super fan who has a lot of money and they want to hang out with you. So that's kind of the basis of what a Japanese sponsor is. And when we're talking about Japanese sponsor, now ask your questions.
Yes. All right. So now the first question is
All
it's
right.
I'm picturing like, okay, for you finally get a Japanese tour. It's sort of like the dream for a lot of wrestlers. Oh, I get to work in
Right.
Japan. That's what Brody did and Hanson did.
Yep.
So you get to work in Japan, and how exactly do you make contact with a sponsor?
I mean, a lot of times it's just through the boys. It's the other wrestlers that have been over there for any time. And, there'll be sponsors that are very specific to different wrestlers or different groups. Bullet Club, when they were hot, especially in the beginning, probably had the most and most extensive sponsors. Those guys, I don't think, spent $1 out of their own damn pocket every single night, didn't matter what city we were in, because they always had a sponsor that was taking them out. I think if I remember correctly, my very first experience with a sponsor, I didn't even understand and realize who he was or what this was about. And this was like in 2007 or somewhere around there, 2008, maybe. I'd gone to one of my smaller Japanese tours, and we got invited out. And if I remember correctly, like Baldo was there, or Matt Bloom, who's now in charge of the performance center and whatnot. And he was out there working with New Japan for all those years. And then there was an All Japan wrestler. Oh no, it was when I was with All Japan, I guess, because it was 2009. And anyway, so we went out there and we got invited out to dinner, and we go out to Roppongi, which is a very well-known party area in Japan. Get in a lot of trouble in Roppongi if you want. And we went out to dinner. And again, I didn't know the situation. I just was going with my friends out to a dinner. Um, and then what I would find out later is that, it's usually one or two people, like I said, that were just super fans, and they invited the wrestlers out, and every single thing you can think of, if you wanted it that night, was taken care of. And they can be as innocent as just a simple dinner, and they can be very, 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 very troublesome, to say the least.
I want to get into both versions of that.
All right. Yeah. Yeah.
I
Absolutely.
I guess like before we get to into the nitty gritty of it, like what about the language barrier? Like these people are obviously fans, but they don't speak
Right.
the same language. How does that go?
Yeah, I mean that I think that's one of the great things, and maybe I've discussed that on here before, is I think you can go out with people that you don't speak the same language with, and you can have a good dinner, you can have a few drinks, you can have a good time and just laugh, and you really don't have to be able to talk to each other. But again, a lot of times the people that were inviting you out were the other wrestlers, people you become friends with, and a lot of times it was the wrestlers who did speak some form of English, and a lot of times they would always have one of the other wrestlers that could speak English. So if there was a need for direct communication, they could ask a question to the wrestler friend, and then they could translate to you, and vice versa, you back to them. And a lot of times those conversations were very short and very sweet, and they weren't, there's a lot of thank yous and a lot of like, no, I'm full, whatever. So a lot of times it's not going to be in full conversations, because you do have a lot of the Japanese wrestlers there, that those are the people who are having the full conversations with your sponsor. You as a gaijin are just getting to experience Japan and its culture and its food, and the debauchery that can happen when one too many drinks get involved. So yeah, it's not a lot of communication, because a lot of times you just can't talk to them. One of my funnier stories that I can tell you, from my end, because a lot of mine were pretty innocent, but I've heard some crazy ones. I've been around a few crazy situations and stories, but one of them that's just kind of talked to that point of communication and lack of thereof. So one night it was a very small group. It was like me and I want to say Kinemaru was there, or maybe Desperado. I'm not sure, but it was just two or three of us, and we're with the sponsor, and the sponsor brought his friend, and the sponsor didn't speak any English, so there was no real communication. Some, again, very short, quick communication situations. And for me, I was always just a very chilled guy. I just wanted to enjoy some good food, and maybe have a whiskey coke or something like that. Anyway, we're just sitting there. When we got there, everything was cool. Everything was very, happy and smiley, and, nice to meet yous and whatnot, and shaking hands and bowing and whatnot. And we get into the restaurant, we're sitting there, we're eating. And as the dinner goes on, I'm sitting there and I'm kind of noticing that this guy's, he looks bummed. He looks sad. I don't, and I'm like, why is this guy sad? I mean, did he get a phone call or something that just bummed him the hell out? And I'm just like, all right, so I don't know what's going on. I'm just kind of eating, and it's just kind of getting a little awkward. And so finally, I leaned over to whoever was with me, and I was like, hey, is he okay? Is basically was asking, is he okay? Is there something wrong? Is he sad? And he's like, I think okay, but then he starts asking the sponsor's friend that was with him. So what it ultimately came out to be was that so I think this was before the Murder Hawk Monster name existed, but I was still the American Psycho Lance Archer. And this guy had an envisionment of the American Psycho. He saw what I did in the ring and how I came out through the crowd and spit the water at people and scared babies and stuff like that. And so, the old school wrestlers, the Stan Hansens, the Bruiser Brodies, the guys that you were talking about earlier that did a lot of time in Japan, this is before social media, so those guys could go nuts. They could do things that you just cannot do in this day and age of professional wrestling, because everybody gets quickly upset and quickly offended, even in Japan. And everything's on social media, so immediately it's out there. So if you do something stupid, immediately people know about it. Well, back in the Stan Hansen and Bruiser Brody days, that didn't exist. So there was a lot of like once they got away from the people and the buildings, everything was just kind of in that moment. Well, those guys used to just, they would pound beers and they would drink till they couldn't freaking stand anymore. And they would smack the shit out of people and they would beat up people. If anybody approached them and said something stupid, those guys would just haul off and knock them out. And it was something that they could get away with. And it was almost expected of them because there were these big, scary foreigners. And that's what Gaijin means. It means foreigner. So,
Mhm.
anyway, back to my story. So the guy's sad. He's kind of down. I'm like, what's going on? My guy asked his guy, and ultimately he comes back and he's sad because he was expecting Stan Hansen, Bruiser Brody. He wanted me just to be pounding beers and yelling at people and go, give me more. And just grabbing handfuls of food and stuff it in my face. Just full caveman, smacking the shit out of people and just being as gaijin rude as you could possibly be. And when especially because it's a Japanese culture, I was always pretty respectful of the people, and their culture, and I didn't want to be seen as this weird foreigner, this bad American that just was completely rude and whatnot. But that's what he wanted. He wanted the rude, beat the shit out of, pounding beers, loud and obnoxious, the American Psycho. He wanted the guy that he saw in the wrestling ring in this tiny little restaurant.
My God.
And I was just like, are you kidding me? And he's like, oh, no, maybe a little sad. You're not American Psycho now. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, he wants, mini beer and he's really loud and that. And I'm like, serious? He's like, yeah. So I told my friend, I was like, hey, and Japanese is like, I'm sorry, it's gomenasai. And I said, hey, gomenasai. And he goes, why? And I just went, whack, and just chopped the ever living shit out of him right in front of the sponsor. And immediately the sponsor was like, yeah, yeah. And he's just like pointing, he's like, yeah, and like yelling for another drink. And like, just I'd periodically chop my friend and he'd
Holy
sell
shit.
it big. Like I just knocked the, life out of him. And from that point on, the sponsor he seemed to be having a good time because I got a little more loud and a little more obnoxious and smacked the shit out of my friend. And that's what he wanted. And so he got it. Um, so
Unbelievable.
like I said, that's still a pretty tame story, but it was just a funny story just because, like I said, he had a full expectation of who I was and what I was supposed to be because of the American Psycho, the stories of the Stan Hansens and Bridger Bodys in the past. And when I didn't give that to him, he was not a happy man. He's ready and willing to pay for everything, but he was expecting entertainment. So I wasn't being very entertaining at first.
You lived up to it though, eventually.
Mhm.
How long, how are you with the same sponsor over the course of an entire tour?
No, so that's where you're thinking like they're on tour. No, this is like city to city, time after different times, different places. If you're in Tokyo, a lot of times, different people would have different sponsors. They're just individuals. They're not people that are with the wrestling companies. You're not with them the whole time. They have no association with New Japan, All Japan, Pro Wrestling, Noah, for the most part. Some of them do sponsor the companies in different degrees, but as far as just when you're spending time with them individually, dinners and whatnot, it's literally just you and them. Like I said, the Bullet Club guys, I remember, and the way wrestling is over there, it's still a little more protected, the old kayfabe term. And especially when I first started in 2011, the whole babies and heels didn't really associate with each other even outside of there, and even when the foreigners were not being able to hang out and talk to anybody. Like when I first started with Suzuki Gun, I was the only gaijin in the group. Later came Harry, and then later came Shelton, so we kind of had each other to hang out with, but we're very different individuals, so we don't always like hanging out with each other. Um, so these sponsors, like I said, are just from city to city and person to person. Some people, I end up becoming good friends with a guy named Udo. Which, backtracking, that first sponsor I went to was Udo. Udo-san, like he was a sponsor. He used to take out a bunch of guys, and it got smaller and smaller. But for whatever reason, he liked me. And so we kind of became friends. And so, like, anytime I was in Tokyo, I'd message him or he'd message me, and we'd always go hang out and eat. It'd usually just be him and one of his girlfriends and myself. And Like I would always try to invite like Shelton or Harry, and Harry usually had his sponsors and people he liked to go hang out with. And, Shelton at first wasn't real big on going out with the sponsors because he's not a drinker. And he thought you had to drink when you went out with these guys, and you don't have to. I mean, it helps ease the tension if you do have a drink or two, or if you are a drinker. There's other guys that would drink these sponsors dry if they could. So anyway, Udo, this is another fun story. So Udo became a kind of a good friend, and Shelton started going with me with Udo. So it'd always just be like Udo and one of his girlfriends or two of his girlfriends, whatever it was. Myself and Shelton would go hang out. We'd go eat a great dinner, and it was always nice, really expensive food because Udo would want to show off that. And anyway, so like he'd always be like, "Hey, you guys want to go to Okinawa?" And Okinawa is a good 4 hour flight, from Tokyo. It's like 4 or 5 hour flight from Tokyo because it's a southern island that's disconnected from the main island of Japan. So you actually have to fly there or take boats. Boats are not very quick on that. So anyway, we'd always say, we can't go because the tours were all so packed together. And we were working with Pro Wrestling Noah at the time. And I remember we had like, I think we had 2 full days off, and then we had a show in Tokyo. So in a sense, we had 2 full days off, and then by the time we'd have to get to the show that was in Tokyo, we didn't have to leave till like 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So we had 2 full days and most of a third day um, kind of off. Anyway, so we told him about this. He's like, "All right, we're gonna go to Okinawa," and we're like, "We have 2 days." He's like, "It's okay." His English isn't good either. Like it was very limited English, but he was always really cool. Very simple conversations, just making sure everybody's okay. Anyway, so he bought Shelton and I first class flights, with him and his girlfriend, and we flew down to Okinawa the morning of the first day off. And we got there and went and got a car or whatever. And the first thing we did is we went and to like glass blowing, where you
Yeah.
can shape and make things. So he takes us to that and gets us that experience of making our own like thing and whatnot. And we kind of do it. They've got the glass blowers that know how to do it, and they kind of show you how to do it, and you kind of do it, and then they take care of make sure it's actually something worthy of making. And then he went and took us to this like hotel, but it was a limited housing hotel. So there was only, I want to say, like 15 rooms or something like that. And it had its own private beach, that was protected or guarded off from just like public people coming in and whatnot. There was coral reef out there, so we were able to just go snorkeling all day and do our thing. And then that night uh, we had our barbecue out on the deck. And Shelton always jokes about the fact he's like, "Yeah, I went on this romantic vacation," and then I look over and it's Lance in the bed next to me because Shelton and I had to share a room. So he was a little disappointed in that, but it was still fun. And then the next day we got up and we spent some more time out on the beach and in the water, and then we checked out and we went to like this uh huge like aquarium in Okinawa that houses like whale sharks and stuff like that. And then that night we flew back to Tokyo. The second night we flew back to Tokyo, again first class back to Tokyo. And then joined the tour again the next day. So it was a very quick but awesome trip down to Okinawa that we didn't have to touch one yen in our pocket.
Dude, unbelievable. Like
Yeah,
the opportunity to travel like that, like you're already in a foreign country and now you get to kind of go off coast and enjoy something a little bit different. Like it's really
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Now,
Like I
oh,
said,
go ahead.
these are all pretty innocent stories too.
Well, I was gonna get to that because,
Okay,
I think that a lot of people hearing this would hear like, "Oh, these guys are just buying all the drinks and there's like a
right,
lot of clubs. You're in a foreign
right.
land." I don't
Yep,
know what your relationship status was at the time, but I know that like a lot of single men would be like, "Let's go party. Like, let's go have a
right.
good time." What do you think was keeping you between the lines, so to speak, under these circumstances?
I don't know if I was, so who knows?
Ah, okay, okay. Let's maybe we can get in there. We can conceal names to protect the innocent.
Or maybe not. But
We don't have to.
but like I think you just have to make your own choices and decide what repercussions you can deal with. A lot of these sponsors, like uh, um, there was another sponsor in Tokyo. And he was awesome. He was a good dude, very chill himself, laid back. His family owned like hospitals and stuff like that. Um, he basically like his name's Oguichi. And Oguichi, he's actually been to my home here in Texas because when they New Japan came to Dallas, he came over with them. He used to travel with Ishii because when Ishii first started traveling outside of Japan, he was really worried and frightened. And Ishii doesn't speak a lot of English, and neither does Oguichi. But like Oguichi just has the money and he can get a translator or whatever the case was, and he was well traveled. But like if you were doing an Oguichi night, you knew it was going to be 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning night. And you met him at, usually 7 or 8 p.m. And it was always, there was a very like routine to the whole thing. And it was always a good time. And again, you could go as crazy as you wanted to, or you could be as chill as you wanted to. And so like it would always start out, we would go out to Roppongi. And like I said, Roppongi, if you don't know what Roppongi is probably one of the most uh, well-known party districts in Japan, especially for foreigners. Lots of clubs, lots of strip clubs, and strip clubs aren't even a big thing in Japan, but there are a lot of them in Roppongi. So we would always start our night out at some kind of dinner, and it was always a badass dinner. Like it was, more traditionally Japanese style dinners, but it was always just amazing food. And he would eat until I mean, you could eat till you threw up if you wanted to. They would just keep bringing you food. And like I said, this is not like you were going to TGI Fridays or something like that. This is a nice place with an extremely extensive menu with really good food. Like I said, top shelf drinks all night long, whatever you wanted. And we would sit there and we'd sit there for 2 or 3 hours and shoot the shit and talk to each other. And it would always be a fairly large group, 5, 6, 7 of us with Oguichi, several of the Japanese boys. And we'd always start it out with the dinner. The next phase of the Oguichi night was always going to a hostess bar. And do you know what a hostess bar is?
I have an idea, but why don't you smarten us up?
Well, what is your idea? What do you think a hostess bar is?
If I were to just take a crack at it, I would guess that it's where the waitresses bring you drinks topless.
No, not at all.
Okay, okay.
Close, close, but not that. A hostess bar, and I think it's the funniest biggest waste of money in my opinion. But it's very ingrained into the Japanese culture. You were close. You go to these places, and a lot of times you're whoever's paying. If you're just going individually, obviously you're paying, or if you're going to groups, because a lot of times in Japan, when you go in groups, it's a split check. Everybody just pools in. Whatever the final cost is, everybody pools in and pays their portion of it. Obviously, if we're going with a sponsor and we were going with Oguichi, he took care of everything. And a hostess bar basically is when you walk in, you would think it's a strip club. Like in a lot of them, especially the nicer ones, like are really well done, like just beautiful, like everything, carpets and walls and lighting and everything that you could possibly think of. Like if you've been to a top shelf, a top notch strip club, you would think you're walking to a strip club. And like there's just, hundreds of beautiful women, and they're all usually dressed, depending on where you go, and like really nice, like almost evening wear, like long dresses, lots of like glitter and glam and things like that. And you usually go and you pay for a girl to sit with you and hang out. They talk to you, a lot of times, like I said, Oguichi would always make sure that they would get 2 or 3 of the girls that could actually speak some English or, what to whatever degree. And they would just sit with you. And if you drank, they would make every drink that you wanted to drink. If you smoked cigarettes, they would never let you, light your own cigarette. They always lit it for you. If you went to the bathroom, they followed you to the bathroom. And when you came out, they had a hot towel for you. If you wanted snacks, they ordered the snacks for you and laid them out for you. If it was a place that actually had food, they'd, set your plate up and hand you the plate so you could eat your food. Depending on where you went, they would actually feed you the food. And
Sounds
it's
pretty
just,
awesome.
well, I mean, I guess it is if somebody else is paying for it. If you're paying for it, like I said, to me, it's just, you're just paying for companionship, I guess is what it is.
Hmm.
There are some that are a little more, they call them opai bars, which opai means boobs. And you can be sitting there like we went with a sponsor one time. I don't remember this is not the Oguichi one. And we were sitting there and we're on a private room. There's probably about 10 of us, wrestlers and the sponsor and his couple friends or whatever. Everybody's got girls sitting next to us and whatnot. And all of a sudden, like the lights dim down, the music goes up, and all of a sudden the girls, they do pull out their tops or take their tops down and pull out their boobs. And the first time they did it, I'm like, what is going on here? I thought we were at a hostess bar. And they're like, yeah, we are. We're just at a Opie hostess bar where they do this. And it would literally be like 30 seconds of it. And then, the lights would come back up and the sound music would go back down and the girls would put back their tops on and just sit next to you. And you weren't doing anything. You weren't paying for like a lap dance. It was just a very quick, weird experience. And those are different ones. Most of the hostess bars that we always went to were the very simple ones, like I said, where they just made your drinks and handed you your snacks and handed you a hot towel when you came out of the bathroom or whatever the case was. And they literally would just hang out with you. And then like when you were leaving the bar, they all go up to the front door and tell you goodbye and stuff. So like you're paying for their time, and you would think it's a strip club, but it's not. So the Ovichi night always started with dinner. Then we next was the hostess bar. If you're still with us at that point, then it was some kind of a strip club, and there was like two different levels of strip clubs that we would go to. The first level was usually a pretty nice one, like it would look like one of the hostess bars, but it would be, the women would be better looking, and then the atmosphere would be more classy and things like that. And then if you continue to be with Ogoichi, you usually ended up at one of the not so nice places, strip clubs. And it just kind of deteriorated, each step. And then, but by the end of the night, it was like a karaoke moment. It was just like there were levels to it. You started out with a dinner, then you went to a hostess club, then you went to a strip club, and then we went to karaoke. And Japanese karaoke, if people don't know, it's not like in a bar that's just open to everybody in the floor. You get your own private room, and depending on how big your party is to how big your room is, and then we do that. And then a lot of times for the end of the night, because, the trains would all stop at midnight or something like that. So if you were there, you were basically there for the long haul. And then by the end of the night, that he always had like his favorite little food spot that was like an Italian spot. So they served like little pizzas and pastas and stuff like that, like small dishes. And that was usually the end of the night scenario where it's now 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and you're sitting in this little Italian spot. And again, drinks all night long. So if you just want to drink, there's never a point where they stop. And so, that's where you would usually end up. And then depending on usually Ogoichi was nice enough and he'd pay for everybody's taxis, because we were always probably a good 30, 40 minutes from the Dome Hotel where we would almost always stay. And so, yeah, we'd always, like I said, about 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, he'd start handing out some yen, 10,000 yen or whatever it was to get in your taxi and take off. And we'd head back off to the Tokyo Dome Hotel as the sun's coming up. And if you were up for it, you could go have breakfast, because breakfast usually started, and then you go pass out for the day. And it was usually the night before a day off. You almost never did that with the next day wrestling.
Oh yeah, dude, what an unbelievable experience.
Yeah.
Now I know that you are keeping it together for the most part. But you're out with a big group of guys. You can go ahead and protect the names of the innocent. What is I mean, it feels like opportunity for a lot of craziness to go on.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, I've seen guys like I'll bring Harry's name up just because I love him and I'm not going to bury him in any way. But he, when he got drunk, we would always say, Harry's getting into the Harryville or whatever. And there was another guy, Tamatonga was great. He would get drunk and he'd just get loud, and it was funny. We always said it was Tamaville. Tama's, I think, probably calmed completely down. He was the last time I was able to hang around him. He's a family man now. He's got 2 or 3 kids, beautiful, beautiful kids, killing it right now in WWE, which I'm happy and proud of him for. But the one fun night, and I just to tell it because it doesn't really make him look bad, I don't think anyway. We were out on the Ogoichi night, and him and he was drinking, and he, like I said, once he'd start drinking, he'd get a little rowdy, and like I remember him and Harry, and he was talking some shit to Harry, and they didn't get in a fight or anything like that, but it was one of those where everybody else was like, oh crap, we're gonna probably have to break these guys up. They keep going at each other. We were ended up at one of the clubs, and like he's got his shirt off and he's dancing on the bar and stuff like that. And then we got to like the karaoke spot, and he's got the microphone, and he's just yelling what's going on, and he's singing that song. He's just going he's just howling at the moon, and then at some point somebody like snatched the microphone away from him, and I don't. It was one of those weird things. Like he was doing that, he was being extra loud, and he was being crazy. He was full on into Thomasville. Somebody snatched the microphone away from him, and then we're all just continuing on having our good time, and then we're leaving the karaoke spot, and there's no Tama, and we don't know where Tama is, and we're like, oh shit, I don't know what happened to Tama. And we nothing we can do. We can't really get in contact with him. We're hoping he's okay. He's in Rapungi. He's a big boy. He'll figure himself out, right?
Right.
Um, supposedly, I guess he got upset that somebody snagged the microphone away from him, and he told the story later. So basically, he took off. He left us, and he said he woke up in like a reggae bar. So he must have gotten into some of these reggae bars. And there was always the Nigerian guys that were outside the bars. They're like, ah man, my friend, you come to my bar. I get you free drink. You hang out, blah blah blah. So he probably got roped into one of those bars and probably had a drink, but then just passed out at the table. And he said he woke up. He was like in a reggae bar or whatever he thought was a reggae bar. And back in the day, like Tama had like he had long hair, but he has the very thick curly hair. And when he wrestled, he'd always have it wet, or he'd have it always pulled back, so it was always neat and whatnot. But I guess at this point, at 7 o'clock in the morning on the streets of Rapungi after a full night Oguichi night of drinking and going to Thomasville, like he said his hair was just out, and he kept trying to flag down taxis, and nobody would stop for him because there's this crazy guy Jin who's walking the streets with his hair out and whatnot. Like this is young and innocent days, and like I said, nothing bad happened. He didn't do anything bad. He just got upset, left, and ended up. I guess he got a taxi, and he was staying at the dojo at the time, and he got to the dojo, and I think we had another one of our guys that was with us who was staying at the dojo, and he didn't know how to get in the dojo, so he didn't know where the key was, and so he was sleeping outside when Tama got back. And like he was like, here's the keys here, and they both, got inside the dojo and went and passed out, and everybody was fine. But just like I said, we didn't find that out till later.
God, man, what an unbelievable night! And again,
Right.
like I'm trying to picture myself under these circumstances. It's like, boy, it would really be hard to like, oh, free drinks, oh, okay, oh, girls over here, okay, free food.
Yeah.
Wow, it's like between trying to keep your diet together, so
Oh no, diet went completely out the window in those moments. And the drinking part, like, see, I was never a big drinker. Like, I actually, Oichi, I guess, had told somebody one time because they were asking, who's the craziest with him, and he said one of the guys' names, and they were like, well, who do you think's the smartest that would go out with you? And I guess my name got brought up because I always drank. I didn't want to make them feel uncomfortable, like I wasn't out there to have a good time with them, but I just never would drink to the point where I was getting drunk and crazy. Like I would have my drinks and I would sip on my drinks, and while everybody else is just pounding stuff and drinking, 2, 3 drinks, I'm still on my one drink while everybody else was through their 3 or 4 drinks. And I did that all night long. So through a stretch of, 8 hours or whatever it was that we were out, I'd probably had 6 drinks in the whole time. You spread that out, add food. I never really got, crazy drunk. I would just get a little buzz. But there was one night, so I don't remember what year it was, but we were doing the New Japan Cup, and the New Japan Cup was finishing at Korakuen Hall in Tokyo. And we always stayed at the Tokyo Dome Hotel back then. And so, like, Korakuen Hall is next to the Tokyo Dome Hotel, and there's plenty of places to go eat and whatnot. And so the sponsor we were getting invited with, and that was another thing for me as far as drinking was concerned. Like, I didn't want to have to get on a bus, or I didn't want to have to get on a train. I didn't want to have to get on a taxi and just be like, just so messed up that I'm wanting to puke and throw up and whatnot. So that was another reason I never really wanted to drink. And it's just my whole life I've kind of been that way. But this was one of those nights. Again, we were near the Tokyo Dome Hotel, and we go to this restaurant. And we're all sitting there eating, and I'm having my couple whiskey highs or Coke highs as they would call them. And Harry's had a couple beers at this point, and we're having good food. And I guess Harry popped out that he liked Otsukan, and Otsukan is the hot sake.
okay,
So he pops off, they like Otsukan. Well, the sponsor here's Otsukan. He goes, oh, Otsukan, ski desu ka? It says, do you like it? And we were like, yeah, we like hot sake. And he's like, oh, okay. And he yells at the server or whatever, and he tells them that he wants hot sake. Well, they bring like, I want to say 5 or 6 vials, the little ceramic vials of
yeah,
hot sake. And we're like, all right, cool, let's have some hot sake. And again, I'm thinking, you know what, we're right here. If they all decide to leave and take taxis and go somewhere else, I'll just bow out and go back to my room. No big deal, right? So again, I've had 2 or 3 whiskey cokes at this point. So we start drinking hot sake. We're hitting it. We're hitting it. We're trying to share it, but we're hitting it. It's mainly Harry and I, and with the sponsor and a few of the guys. And there was one girl that traveled with New Japan, and she was kind of she wrote all the results and stuff on the internet and whatnot. And she was hanging out with us. And just a great time. Everybody's drinking a few drinks, and now I'm having a few more because again, I'm right here by the dome. I can go back to my room, no big deal. I don't have to get a taxi. I don't have to go on a train. I'm okay. I'll cut it loose a little bit tonight. So I'm getting pretty toasty at this point. I've had a bunch of hot sake. I've had my whiskey highs, and then they're like, "All right, next place, next place." And I'm like, "Well, where's the next place?" And they're like, "Oh, just walking down here. We're gonna go to karaoke." All right, cool. Let's do that. I mean, again, we're just walking down. I know where the Dome Hotel is. I get there and get to my room. I'm thinking no problem. I'm pretty lit at this point, especially for me, right? So you walk into this karaoke spot and it's like downstairs. We get down there and I guess it's last call. And 15 vials of the hot sake show up at the table.
Oh boy.
Plus everybody, I think they got me a whiskey coke too, and Harry a beer, and everybody else that's doing stuff. And a few of the guys had bailed out after the dinner. So we're sitting there, and again, it's kind of rude to leave anything on the table that the sponsor that buys you. So we're trying to get this hot, and we're trying to pass it around. And some people are getting in with us. Some people are just, they're not having it. The little girl that came with us, she was in the bathroom puking. We somehow successfully got all 15 vials of hot sake down and done.
Holy shit.
At this point, I'm gone. I'm done. But Harry and I, so the night finishes, we've got to walk back, and there's a big bridge on one side by the Dome Hotel and over there by Cork and Hall in that area. So we're walking, and Harry and I are literally like arm in arm, and we're just weaving back and forth, the snake walk, if you want to call it that. And we're just holding on to each other, and we're going up this bridge, which was very difficult, and then down this bridge, which amazingly we didn't fall. We amazingly get back in the Dome Hotel, and I go into my room and pass out. The next day, I remember I tried to get out of my room 3 different times. First time I got up, I think I went and tried to have some breakfast, and it was bad. It wasn't good. So I had a little bit of breakfast. I went back to my room. I laid back down. I got up probably about, I don't know, noon, 1 o'clock, something like that. And now I'm like, I've got to get out of here. I need to go to the gym. I need to sweat some of this out. I take pre-workout and everything. I get outside of my room, and I was just like, this ain't happening. I'm going to fall down. I can't do this. So I go back to my room. I just lay back down, pass out for a few more hours. It's probably getting close to 7 o'clock, and Masa, or Fat Ass Masa, that he's kind of well known around the AEW lore and whatnot. He's good friends with the Bucks and a lot of people. He's a good dude. He's taking Harry and I out to dinner that night. So it's like 7 o'clock. We're meeting with him. I'm like, I'm getting out of here. I'm getting dressed. I'm going to go down there. So I get down there, and I'm still kind of like, I'm like, man, this has been a rough one. Like, I probably should have puked, and it probably would have helped, but I didn't. And then I get down there, Moss is down there, and finally Harry comes down there. And I'm like, oh God, Harry, that was dumb. That was the worst night of my life. I can't believe I did that. So hungover. And he's like, yeah, me too. And I was like, man, I didn't leave my room today. I tried 3 different times, and all the times got outside the door and had to go back in. He's like, oh yeah, me too. And I was like, did you do anything? He goes, oh yeah, I got up at like 9 o'clock this morning and went and trained with the original Tiger Mask and kickbox training. And I was like, what? And he goes, yeah. I go, you left the hotel and went and did kickboxing training with the original Tiger Mask, Sayama-san. And he's like, yeah. I was like, you're fucking insane. And he goes, oh man, it was so bad. He's like, I was sweating sake. And I was like, well, that was probably good of you, but that's insane, bro. You're a dang machine. He's like, yeah. I couldn't disrespect Tiger Mask. I was like, okay, I guess not. And we went to dinner, and like Masa was like, you want drink? And I was like, oh, hell no.
Dude, unbelievable. I now not sure if you're like a big Tiger Mask fan or not. Were you pissed off that you missed Tiger Mask too?
No, not at all.
Okay.
You were in recovery mode. Not care at all, one bit whatsoever.
We did just get a super chat. By the way, if you guys have any questions here in our last little bit, please use the super chat and we will get them in. This one's from a guy I know, actually, Instagram wrestling historian. He asked, "What's your favorite thing about Japanese culture?"
That's a favorite thing. There's so much about the Japanese culture that I actually enjoy. I mean, I just enjoy the basic respect that they have. Like if you give even an ounce of respect, like just learning a little bit of it, just being able to say thank you and you're welcome, and please and stuff like that. Just like the very basic respectful words that you can use if you use them, and especially in any kind of proper sense, they're going to show you a thousandfold over respect back to you. You know, I mean, I've been uh, back in the day, like now it's so easy, like with your phone, you know, your iPhones and whatnot, you can put where your destination in your maps in your iPhone, and it'll tell you every single train, like how far you need to walk to get to the first station, what, you know, train line to get on, how many stops you go to, you get off, where to go once you get off and change trains. Like it tells you everything. But when I first started going back over there, or going over there back in like 2009, 2007 through 2011, in those early years of New Japan from 2011 on, you know, it wasn't, your technology was coming along, but it wasn't that good. And I remember like standing on a train, uh, at a train station, just kind of looking up, trying to figure out, you know, stuff's in English, but it's flashing so fast. And there'd be people that would get off the trains and ask me if I was okay and where I needed to go. And I'd say, oh, you know, this station. And they'd go, oh, yeah, upstairs, green line, right side, four stop. And then you're there. And I'm like, oh, thank you. You know, and then they would get on their next train and keep going on to their destination. So just the people in general are just amazing people. And like I said, if you just show an ounce of respect, you'll get tenfold back. The food is amazing. Obviously, if you have an open mind to different kinds of food, you're gonna love the food because it is so good. You know, just stuff like that.
Dude, unbelievable. Sounds amazing. I know that the idea of getting to go over there and enjoy that culture, enjoy the food, enjoy the people, the setting.
Yeah.
It's like, man, it got to be like a dream come true. Now,
Yep.
one of the things that I am wondering about it is like we referenced Brody, Hanson,
Hmm.
those guys, and I'm sure that they had sponsors of their own back in the day,
Yeah.
and many guys have.
Yeah.
With that, with all that being said, I'm sure that back in the late '70s, early '80s, it's not just drinking and women and
Hmm.
you know these different towns.
Hmm.
I'd imagine that there's a drug element. Now, was there any of that going on in among your group of folks, or have you heard any stories about that going on with these sponsors?
No, and that I think that's kind of a more of a, you know, I mean, if there was, I didn't see it. And the thing
Mm,
is, over there, drugs are not tolerated like they are here. You know, one of the wrestlers, Matt Seidel, who famously, unfortunately, got caught with, you know, it's a very public story, so I'm not like outing anybody here.
yeah.
But he got caught with like the oil for vaping, and it was THC, and he spent a decent amount of time in prison over there, until he got let go. And then I don't know, like they'll sometimes give you a 10-year ban or a lifetime ban. I don't know what his situation is with that. So they don't tolerate it like you can here. You know, you get, there was, and I can't remember his name. He was in TNA at one point. He was touring with Noah, and this isn't a drug scenario. This was just, you know, they don't mess around when you do something stupid and be disrespectful. And like he got drunk one night and he jumped in, because like if you go into the convenience stores, there's always like a big ice cream thing right in the middle, and it's just open, but it's cold and it keeps all the ice cream. And so it's very easy to reach in and grab what you want. Well, he was, I guess, hot because it was summertime, and his drunk ass decided to climb into the ice cream thing. And then ultimately it got him, he had to do a public apology. And then he got booted off the tour. And, you know, it's one
Wow.
of those things where they'll revoke your visas and stuff like that. So the drug culture is not tolerated at all. So, I mean, it's there if you really want to search for it. Like Rapungi's a good place to go because there's a lot of, like I said, the seedy people that are, you know, working in the clubs and whatnot. That if you want to look for it, you want to chance it, you can find it. I never did, so it was not a situation where I ever saw it. And the people that I was with and around when we would be with the sponsors were never dealing with that stuff. It was just, it was alcohol. It was, you know, that was the thing. And I think that's why you saw a lot of really, really drunk people over there, whether it was Japanese or American or whatnot. You're talking about the 70s or whatnot. A great story that I heard from Dory Funk. The Yakuza, which is the Japanese mafia, back in the day in the 70s and 80s and whatnot, maybe the early 90s, was heavily involved with the pro wrestling side of things. It's since been outed for the most part. There isn't any involvement in pro wrestling directly anymore like it used to be. So Dory tells a story, and it's a pretty cool story, but crazy story at the same time. Dory was over there. I guess he'd done a show. He's like, "Oh, we're going out to dinner tonight." Again, you get invited to these sponsor dinners and you just go. You go and you have a good time. And all the stories that I've already told. And so he says he goes and they pull up, in the taxi to the restaurant or whatever. And he's with whoever he's with. And they go in the front door of this restaurant and there's nobody in the restaurant. He's like, "This is odd." And he's like, "Open." And they're like, "Oh, in the back." They're pointing the back. So they go into the back and they get to the back room and they open these doors, and he said there's just like one long table, and it's got all these guys sitting at it, and they're all like Yakuza guys, obviously, because they're all like in full suits and whatnot. And there's no open seats, so he's just kind of looking around. Nobody's told him where to sit or do anything, so he's just kind of looking. And there's one open seat, so he's like, "Oh, I guess that's my seat." So he goes and he sits in this seat, and he says he can visibly see all these guys who are, like I said, obviously Yakuza, getting visibly like worried, like they're like looking at him, they're wide-eyed, and they're like, "Oh my god," but they don't want to say anything to him because like he's the guest of honor or whatever. So nobody's saying anything to him. He's sitting there, but he can see that the attitude and has just changed. Everybody's like worried, and everybody's stopped laughing, and nobody's like just drinking, and like the whole party just kind of came to a screeching halt to a degree because he's sitting there. And he's sitting there, and all of a sudden, this hand goes on my shoulder, and he looks up, and the guy's sitting there or standing there, and it's the Yakuza boss. And he realizes, he's like, "Oh shit, this is the Yakuza boss. These are all the subordinates. That's why they're freaking out because I'm sitting in his chair." He goes, "So I try to get up immediately." And he's like, I jump up, and he's like, "Oh, Gomenasai, I'm sorry." And he's like, "No, no, no, sit, sit, sit." So the Yakuza boss makes him sit back down. And then he yells at one of his subordinates, and they bring over just like a stool, like a log stool, and set it next to Dory Funk. And the Yakuza boss sits next to it, or sits on it next to Dory Funk at his table with all his regular guys sitting in regular chairs. And Dory's like, it got a little bit better. He's like, but he could still see that like these guys were worried for their lives and their fingers or whatever you want to say from Yakuza stories, because now they don't know if they should be offering the Yakuza boss their seat, or if they're just in complete conflict of what to do, because if they insult the Yakuza boss by saying anything, then they're going to get in trouble for saying anything. But now they're also thinking if they don't say anything, and afterwards the Yakuza boss is like, "Why didn't you give me your chair? Why didn't you say something?" Now they're just conflicted. They don't know what to do. They don't know if they're going to get beat, or if they're going to just have the best night of their life. And he said they just sat there and ate and drank, and the Yakuza boss just laughed, and they had somebody translating for him and whatnot. And he said he had the greatest time in the world, but he just said this, like I said, just imagine being one of these, underneath guys in the Yakuza, and the way they kind of conduct their business, to see their boss sitting on a stump next to Dory Funk, who's sitting in his chair, and not knowing how to have a good time because they just don't know what the situation is going to be. And so Dory's like, "For me, it was great." He's like, "So much good food, so many great drinks, laughing with the Yakuza boss." And he said we stayed there until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and they take him back to the hotel. And so he's like, "I don't know what happened to the rest of those guys, but I had a damn good time."
At least Dory had a great time.
Yeah.
Did you ever see Yakuza, or were you ever around them when you're, in some of these kind of seedy areas?
My two, I think, just direct like moments. So one was in wrestling. This was 2009. I did a short tour with All Japan. And I remember we were in the locker room, and like, we're in groups. So I was in a group called Voodoo Murders. And our main guy was in our locker room, and somebody came in and said something to him, and it was like, "Oh," and it was me and another guy named Michael Faith, and Michael Faith has since passed away. But anyway, so Michael and I were in the locker room, and he's like, "Oh, please, Lance, Mike, son, come here." And we're like, "Okay." They're like, they kind of look at the table, and they make the shape of a ring, and they kind of go, "Tonight, this side, or okay, this side, or okay, this side, okay, this side, no." And we're like, "What?" And we say, what? And he goes, he says it again, this side, this side, or okay, this side, no. And we're like, why this side, no? And he's like, Yakuza? And we're like, yeah. And he's like, yeah, tonight maybe Yakuza, this side. And we're like, are you serious? And he's like, yeah, yeah. And we're like, okay. And now we're the heel group, we're the bad guys, right? So we're thinking there's no way they're gonna put us near the Yakuza guys because our job is to mess with the people and be heels, right?
Yeah.
Sure enough, our corner is right on the corner with the one side, and you could not mistake them because they were like second row, full suits, full ties, didn't just sat like this the entire time, didn't yell or scream or cheer or anything like that. And so it was one of those moments where we're like, you shut up,
Hello, thumbs
you
up,
shut
guys.
up, you shut up. So we didn't say anything to the user boys because we didn't know how serious they were, and if like we started yelling at them and whatnot, if they would get mad and react to it. The only other time that I remember, so I've got one tattoo on my leg, and it's a big koi fish, and it's on my calf, and so I got the first one done in like 7.5 hours of work done. And most of the time, there was just never was any time in Japan to get a tattoo done. I was on an individual tour, kind of vacation tour, and so I was had the chance to get it done. Well, I go back to Japan during the G1 of 2022, and so I hit up the artist and I was like, "Hey, I'd like to get some more work done. If you're available, this is when I'm going to meet Osaka because that's where the tattoo shop was." And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, I'll have some time, so come by." So we set up the time and whatnot. And I go in, and sure enough, there's a guy that's getting like the full back piece thing done, and he looks like he's probably Yakuza, just his general look and whatnot. And he's getting this full back piece worked on. And I remember, I guess, my big ass comes into the random tattoo shop in Osaka, Japan, and they're not ready to see me walk in. And I guess he starts asking me like, "Who's this guy?" and whatnot. And they're like, "Oh, he's a pro wrestler." And he's like, "Oh, pro wrestler." And he wanted to arm wrestle me. And my mind immediately goes, I'm going to arm wrestle you. He's not a big guy. I'm going, I'm going to beat him if I arm wrestle him. But if I arm wrestle him and beat him, does that make him feel disrespected? And now he wants to take care of things in a different way because he got beat? Or do I let him beat me and make him think that he's some big belly badass when he's not? So I just was like, no, 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 it's okay. Too much pain, my tattoo. I was like, I'm okay. I just kind of bowed out of it. Because my mind was like, I'm not gonna let him beat me, but if I don't let him beat me, what's gonna happen? And you could obviously tell like that he was a Yakuza guy.
Man, it feels like there's no right answer because then on the flip side, it's like you could say no, 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 and then he feels disrespected from that, right? So it's like, what's the correct answer? I don't know.
I mean, we laughed. I shook his hand. Everything was fine. Like it was halfway joking, but it was one of those like I was like, all right, I can't let this little guy beat me, but also don't want to do it and let beat him and have something insane happen. So yeah, not that it would have. Who knows? Maybe it would have been a friendly. Like he'd have just been like, "Oh, Segura is so big and strong," and he probably would have had a good time, and it would have just been a good story from him. But he probably couldn't go back to his guys and tell them that he got beat by this guy's. And who knows? I don't know. I just, like I said, I got out of it and didn't actually arm wrestle the dude.
You did it the smart way.
Maybe that's what I like.
Now we're approaching an hour, and usually this is something I've been trying to do recently on all my
Okay.
shows as I'm starting to wrap up. I want to. I always wonder if I've asked all the right questions. So I'm gonna pitch it to you, Lance. What did we miss in this episode? What's one story that you wanted to tell that I did not prompt you for?
I can't really think of any. Like I said, there's just been the whole thing about the sponsored culture in Japanese wrestling is it's a privilege because when you're a wrestler out there, you're in a foreign land. Depending on what kind of guy you are, whether you like to spend time by yourself or you like to party, you can find those sponsors and they're going to take care of you. I mentioned earlier how the Bullet Club, like those guys, especially in the heyday of it, the Carl Andersons and the Luke Gallows and all those guys, Tomatongas and all of them, because they were all in the Bullet Club, they didn't spend the night where they had to spend $1 because every single night they had different sponsors and, the different degrees of them and whatnot. And a couple times I got to hang out with those guys because we tried to kayfabe the scenario and stuff and whatnot. But it was always a good time. Like I said, you were with your friends, you were with your boys. Those are the experiences you'll remember for the rest of your life. like I said, and not having to worry about anything like money wise, paying for food, finding food, because sometimes that was always a stretch depending on what little city you went in. Because the bigger cities, it's not that hard to find, and there's always something fast food, a beef bowl, something like that nearby. There's a lot of English and whatnot, but you get outside of Tokyo and some of these smaller, more rural towns, and then you end up not being with somebody that that can help you and guide you and things like that. You don't realize how small the world is or how big the world is sometimes. And you get into some of these places, and it's an interesting experience. I'll tell this one last quick story, and it was one of those just truly innocent situations. So we were out with a sponsor, and it was a Suzuki Gun sponsor, and we get to the karaoke spot, and he's invited a couple of the hostess girls to come with us. Then they've left their club, but they're still being paid to do the exact same thing, where they're sitting with you, drinks, cigarettes, bathroom, hand you the towel, all that stuff. And it's like me, Shelton, and Harry, and me and Shelton sitting there. And I remember this very vividly. Like, the girls, this is one of those things where you don't realize how sheltered places in the world can be, and how culturally mixed the USA truly is, until you get into one of these moments. And so anyway, we're sitting there, and I remember the girls, we're all having a good time. We're laughing, talking Michinoku's, telling the girls things about Shelton that's making them giggle and whatnot. But at one point, like, one of the girls is like looking at his hand, and she's looking at the top of his hand, she's looking at the bottom of his hand, she's looking at the top of his hand, she's looking at the palm of his hand. And the thing is, his skin was darker on the top and lighter on his palms.
Mm-hmm.
And, she's doing that, and she calls one of her friends over, and they're doing the same thing, and they're feeling him, they're touching him, and they're looking and looking. And I'm like, I think we finally asked Taka or somebody, like, hey, what's going on? What's the deal with these girls? And again, a very innocent moment. And so the reality was, the girls had never been around a black man in their life.
Never.
They never. They, like I said, they've obviously seen TVs and movies and things like that, but this is very small town Japan. And like I said, Shelton's a very open-minded man, and he's experienced situations with children like this before. And he wasn't upset or offended, because it wasn't an offensive situation. And it was just, they would literally, this is their first time ever in their lifetime, and they're probably in their early to mid 20s, had ever been around somebody who wasn't Japanese or a white man. It was their first black man to ever be around. And like I said, very simple and innocent situation. It was just kind of one of those moments where you realize, like I said, how culturally mixed the United States is, and how small the world can be in different places.
Man, so cool, and such great stories that honestly, it's like, I've never even thought to ask any of the guys that I know who've gone to Japan a question
Mhm.
about, like, sponsors or, like, these cultural differences, stuff like
Right.
that. So it's giving me ideas for some of the other podcasts that I do, and, like, man, what an unbelievably cool episode. I really enjoyed this, man. Such a unique topic that, yeah, again, I just don't think it's explored enough on podcasts. So thank you for coming up with the idea. I think this was a really fun one.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I had more insane stories to tell you, and I'm sure there's other guys, if they were willing to open up about it, if they're not going to save them for their books, would tell you about them. I didn't have as many insane, crazy experiences as some people had, but I had some of the best experiences in my life.
Dude, good on you, for real. It's I again try to picture myself in that setting, and I know I would have been a fucking maniac, especially if I was in my 20s. So good for you. What do you think it is, man? Is it because you worked in clubs, you're just not enamored by the scene so much?
Maybe. I mean, I worked in the clubs. I never, even in all my years that I worked in nightclubs, I never went, balls to the wall crazy on anything. I was always pretty even keeled when I was in the clubs, whether it was a regular nightclub or a strip club or whatever that I was working at the time. So yeah, I've just never been that guy. I can be around it without being, completely indulged in it, I guess is the best way to say it.
Now, last question, then we will wrap this one up. You
Cool.
mentioned that one night with all that sake and the
Hmm.
miserable day that followed. What is completely annihilated shit face Lance like? Are you crazy guy or are you quiet?
No,
Let's get
I,
out of here,
I
guy.
think, I think, I think, I think I get really quiet. Probably a lot of like the closed eyes, smiling, giggling look. Um, you'd have to ask other people more what I mean. but I've never been one of those guys. Like even when I decided to cut loose, I never got in any trouble. I never got in any fights. I didn't break anything. I didn't do anything dumb. I didn't, you know, I was always pretty responsible, even when I would get pretty messed up. Like, so that night, because I knew I was near the Tokyo Dome, I didn't have to get in a taxi. I didn't have to get on a train. I was like, all right, I'll cut loose. And I did, and wobbled my way back to the damn room and regretted every moment of it.
Now, damn it, I have to do one more follow up, and then I promise I'll let you go.
Okay. No, you're good.
So you're not a huge drinker, obviously, and this was like a one night deal for you because you were, circumstances.
Right.
Since then, is that the last time that you've ever been that drunk?
That I can think of, yeah.
Man, all
Yeah.
right.
And that was probably 2014 or so.
Holy shit! So 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, I've had drinks, but I've just not been like that insanely drunk.
Good on you, brother.
Yeah.
And and good episode, man. I can't wait to catch you again here in 2 weeks for the Hawk's Nest. Thank you guys, everybody who joined us. Thank you to Instagram Wrestling Historian for the little donation. And guys, we'll be back here in a couple weeks with a new episode of the Hawk's Nest.
Take it easy.
I want like a caca noise at the end. We're gonna
Caca!
See you guys.